Hello, Harold Pollack.
Glenn Loury, it's great to talk to you again.
Good to be talking to you, Harold, of the University of Chicago. Glenn Loury, The Glenn Show, Brown University. Harold, you're a regular on The Glenn Show. How did that happen?
I feel very honored. I don't know, things happen to you in life, and all of a sudden you end up famous, and, I can't really tell you how it happened. It's just...
Well, wait a minute. I understand that you turned down a lunch invitation with Michelle Obama in order to do this with me. Could I be wrong?
That's correct. Just me, Michelle, and 2,000 other people.
Oh, you couldn't bear the crowd, could you?
No, it's embarrassing to have to share, share her company with so many other people.
I see. Okay. Anyway, so you've been writing and talking recently about some controversies that have arisen in the area of disability policy and the way those programs are working and how they may be being used or allegedly misused. And I thought that perhaps we might have a conversation today about that kind of issue. I'm interested in your perspective. I want to know kind of what the landscape is of the policy debate that's going on, and maybe we can then talk too about some of the more general kind of theoretical or conceptual challenges that we face when we think about making policy to respond to the needs of disabled populations.
I'd love to talk to you about that. So I should preface this by saying that the conversation was occasioned by a series of programs that were done on This American Life and Planet Money and other NPR outlets in which Hannah Jaffe-Walt described some of the challenges facing disability programs and went to one particular county where roughly 1 in 4 adults were working age were on disability programs, and both what was right about the program and what was deeply flawed about the program, led me to talk about it, and it's this seems to be an issue that has struck a nerve with many people.
I see. Okay, so maybe we could start just by describing what the set of programs. These are state programs, federal programs. What kind of claims are people making? Is it medical stuff? Is it income support? Is it home care? Blah blah.
So the real issue that is controversial concerns the growth in SSI and SSDI. So SSI is supplemental security income, and SSDI is Social Security disability insurance. So people, if you're a 56-year-old retired mill worker and your plant closes and you have a bad back and you can't get another job and your physical condition limits your work, you might end up on SSDI, which brings a cash payment, and it also brings Medicare. Now, if you are a very low income person and you haven't accumulated the credits you need to get SSDI, or you're a very low income child with a disability, you might end up on SSI. And particularly during the recession, the caseloads for these two programs have grown, and these are massive programs.
How big? How much money are people getting?
In the SSDI program, roughly speaking, we're talking about for these programs something on the order of $240 billion, of which a substantial fraction is for medical care. So these
Put that in perspective. How much are we spending, let's say, on TANF transfers to people?
So the TANF cash portion of welfare for single moms is, we're talking more like in the 20 billion range. So
okay, so it's an order of magnitude more than what's being spent to support single moms, at least income support.
That's right. Now these are larger programs, and these are also programs that serve people who have very serious medical problems. So. There's a set of people. What's controversial about these programs is a lot of the caseload growth has occurred in things like musculoskeletal difficulties and mood disorders and things that are a little bit less definitive than a cancer diagnosis or a heart attack. But a lot of the money that's actually being spent in the medical area is being spent on people who might have HIV or who might have really serious problems. In fact, something like 1 in 5 recipients actually die within a relatively short period. So it's a very heterogeneous population.
So the person has to be designated as eligible for making an SSI or SSDI claim, and that's by some kind of medical diagnosis. Is that correct?
Yes, there's a pretty stringent procedure by which you have to have a qualifying diagnosis, which which prevents you from working. And and about 60% of the people who apply for disability benefits are denied. So it's not something that is an automatic pass. But however, the caseload has grown, and it's grown for a couple of different reasons. One is there's more people who are poor than there used to be because of the recession. The baby boomers are aging into the peak years where people experience disability. There are more women who are in the workforce, and therefore they've accumulated eligibility for SSDI that they didn't have before. So there's a number of things happening, but there's a real concern that these programs are becoming a sort of backdoor guaranteed income program for people who are near retirement. There is also some level of people who are getting onto the program who probably should not be, and there's there are many questions about the administrative capacity of the program to do what are called continuing disability reviews and ways to sort of check up to make sure that that people have been properly assessed when they've gotten onto the program, or to make sure that people aren't being rejected from the program wrongly. And there were a number of problems with the This American Life show, but one of the real problems was that it really implied that there was this industry of sort of shyster lawyers who were getting people on the program who really didn't deserve it, and did not really discuss that this is actually a very stringent program, and by many measures.
But enrollment rates have grown. But you can find examples of counties in which 25% of the adult population is making these claims.
Yeah, they're very striking. There's some very good. The critics of the program. This is not a case. It happens to be a right-wing meme that that this is sort of along the lines of what happened in the welfare debate. But there's some very serious economists who are raising questions about the program. David Autor and Mark Duggan are the two names that are the most prominently mentioned, and these are good people. And one of the things that they and others have looked at are some of the striking regional disparities. So, if the places where you see these really high rates tend to be in Appalachia, often places where there's mining or other industries like that are that have a combination of A, these are dying industries, and B, they're industries where you really do have to do physical labor in a lot of the jobs. So if you have a bad back and you're a University of Chicago professor, it's really not such a big deal. But if you have a bad back and the available employment for you requires that you pick up a shovel, or that you lug a heavy trash can, or that you go work in a mine, it's a much more reasonable thing to say, hey, this guy really is disabled in terms of the realistic.
Okay, yeah, I see there could be a moral hazard problem. That is, there could be a problem that people could, quote unquote, fake it. And by faking it, I just mean not put in the effort that would be necessary and that they might otherwise be able to do to keep themselves self-sustaining. But there's also a heterogeneity problem, we would say, right? I mean, the population is not uniform. You got a lot of different circumstances, and this idea of what's your alternative job if you can't do this, or how does, as given physical ailment, differentially impair people depending upon where they're located in the economic structure. That's a different issue beside. But still, it sounds like a fat target for somebody who would be a critic of government out of hand and of nanny state kind of creeping stuff. Why is that wrong?
Well, it is a fat target, and it is. And by the way, by 2016, some financial adjustments need to be made in the program because, in a way that was actually predicted by actuaries almost 20 years ago, but in a way that's now coming to fruition, the funds in this program are really starting to run dry, and so there have to be some adjustments made, to ensure solvency. I think there are a couple of issues here. As you pointed out, one of the
2016?
Yeah.
So people generally say Social Security is good for another, generation and a half or something like that. But with respect to this aspect of the Social Security safety net, not so.
Yeah, there's a real deadline coming up that's going to require some adjustment. And what that adjustment should be is something that people fight about. I mean, there are some fundamental complexities here. One of the things that you pointed out, which I think is important, disability in the actual world that we live in is a very multidimensional and continuous thing. That people have different kinds of functional limitations, and depending on the opportunities that they have or the job skills that they have, these functional limitations matter differentially for different people. And then you have a program that has to give you a binary decision: either you're eligible for disability benefits or you're not. And that's just a fundamental mismatch. So, for example, there are some people who right now are trying desperately to get on disability because they need health insurance for a very real and expensive health condition, but they may or may not be appropriate, for receiving a monthly cash benefit. And so one of the issues that we have as a society, which hopefully welfare reform will, that health reform hopefully will make better, is decoupling, making sure that low-income people can get access to health care from the issue of getting access to these benefits. Now, I should say these benefits are modest. These are things that, if the best thing the economy can offer you is $13,000 a year and a Medicare card, that's the moral hazard problem is
$30,000 a year. That's
1.3.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay.
So that's you're not going to be quitting your job anytime soon.
Well, it's not a good life on $13,000 a year.
No.
That's for sure. But it raises in my mind, as you talk here, this binary. We have people who have conditions. Someone has to declare 0 or 1 about those people, eligible or ineligible. What does one mean by disability? What exactly are we trying to insure against? Just a kind of sort of meta question. What's the theory of disability insurance?
Yeah, I think that there's no one. I don't think there's any one satisfactory theory, and you have to compound that with the administrative reality of a program that serves millions of people across the United States. And you just cannot stop and do an OJ trial for every individual who has major depression and who lost their job as a barista in Starbucks. And you have to have some way to standardize the way that we address those questions that is predictable and fair and and is financially disciplined in terms of the overall goals of the program.
Is it possible mood disorders? A person claims they're depressed. It's going to be hard to know from the outside whether or not that claim is valid. All they need to do is get a shrink to affirm the claim.
Well, the thing is, though, that it's harder than that because there really have to be signs of a genuine limitation. And it's true that
Doctor, I can't get out of bed in the morning, and don't get out of bed. Let me just go a couple of weeks without getting out of bed.
Well, it's certainly the case that if you are determined to, if you are determined enough to completely disrupt your life in order to qualify for disability, there are certainly some people, there's a route to do that. And in fact, one of the issues that needs to be attended to is the Social Security Administration has been asking for more money to sort of do a better job of coming back and assessing people after they've been eligible for the program, and sort of continuing disability reviews for cases like this. But many people with, I think there is a moral hazard issue, but there's also a misconception in the American population about what mental illnesses are really like. And in fact, if you have major depression or you have bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or any number of other psychiatric disorders, they are extremely debilitating.
Yeah.
And if you look at whether it's mortality risk or quality of life or the ability to be functional. You give me a choice between having someone amputate my left leg below the knee, or suffering chronic major depression. I would take the leg amputation every time. I think that so it's a challenge because there are certainly some elements.
But what fraction of the cases, and I'm not being argumentative. I really want to just know. If I had a bell-shaped curve or wherever it would be, the distribution of severity, and I would have put that against a threshold, which is above this severity, you get to make a claim.
Mm-hmm.
How much area is under the curve to the right of the threshold on that?
I think that there's a real effort made to keep it over near the tail. Now, how successful that is and how varied that is around the country and in different localities, I think, is a different question. But I think that it should not be unless people are dishonestly, the assessment process is done without integrity. I mean, they're really looking for ways that your psychiatric disorder has prevented you from working, has looking for concrete evidence that that you're impaired and that impairment has a genuine impact on your work prospects. If you are unable to hold a job because you couldn't get out of bed and lost that Starbucks job, and we can document that, that puts you in a different category. Now, I think people react to that differently from my type 2 diabetes prevented me from working, and there's a moral question about these disorders that the American population is ambivalent about. But there are a set of concrete benchmarks that people are supposed to be able to identify that would that would keep it over in the tail of the distribution. I do want to point out something that goes back to when you and I when I learned some labor economics from you a long time ago.
Oh, you still remember that, do you?
I do, yeah.
It was in a different century,
I think you were co-teaching it with Alfred Marshall or something like that.
Watch out now.
But there's another basic issue, which is how do you deal with people who are just the most marginalized workers, who are just the last hired and the first fired, and when we enter a deep recession, these are the people who are going to be hurt. And maybe you'd like to, since I've been babbling, maybe you'd like to explain one of my favorite parables, the dog bone economy, and we can talk about how that may or may not be relevant.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not sure it's relevant, but you will enlighten me, I'm sure. I mean, let me just amplify on the general question. So this is social insurance that we're talking about. And the question is how to calibrate it and implement it and deliver it in the context of people who have conditions that impair their ability to work. Mm-hmm. And that raises a more general question about, what should be your policy toward people. I mean, if we've got a population which is heterogeneous and some people have less skills, less intelligence, less emotional control, less physical capacity, then they're going to be right on the margin of getting rationed out whenever things get tight in the labor market, and they're always going to be struggling. How can we identify them? How can we help them? Mm-hmm. So that's what I think we're talking about as a general matter. Now, the metaphor, and this is due to, do you remember his name?
Is it Satterthwaite?
Yeah, it's not Mark Satterthwaite. It's not Satterthwaite, but it's something like that. Sorry. Satinger. Satinger, Sattinger.
We deeply apologize.
And it might be Mark or Mike. I think it's Michael Satinger. Anyway, he has a series of papers about inequality of wages and of job assignments in labor markets, how that works, what's the economics of that. And he's making the point, as I understand it, with this metaphor, that the distribution of rewards that we see amongst workers might be a reflection of the shape of the opportunities that are available to the workers and the mechanism of rationing those opportunities. It may not as much be a function of the intrinsic qualities of the workers themselves. And so concretely, some people will have more and some people will have less, have easier, cushier, softer jobs, more rewarding, more financially rewarding. And fewer, there's going to be inequality in that, and we might be tempted to say that the differences between people and those measures of success are reflections of qualities that those people have, but we have to bear in mind that the people are scrambling for a fixed or relatively fixed set of opportunities which are different and which have different rewards associated with them, and the mechanism by which they're sorted out amongst those opportunities will be a powerful determinant, quite apart from the individual characteristics of the people, of the inequalities that are observed between them.
Now, let me just give you sort of a restatement of what you just said, but in more bovine language.
I was going to get to that, but you go ahead. We could just be a tag team here.
There you go. So right behind SSA, there's a vacant lot, and every day, 100 dogs fight over some bones.
Yeah.
And so there's a bunch of dogs who end up without a bone, and so the
a truck comes to the lot and dumps a bunch of bones on the ground every morning, and they fight. Exactly.
Yeah. So a bunch of economists come and they basically discover that they have a human capital story, that the dogs that don't that end up without a bone, or they're sort of weaker, and they want to teach them how to weightlift and teach them karate so they can get their bones and not get edged out. And then the sociologists come in and say, no, it's actually the social networks of them.
Right.
And the social psychologists come and say, actually, it's self-efficacy that some of the dogs just kind of give up.
The cognitive psychologists think it's their IQ. They've got a G or something that is unequal amongst the dogs, and that accounts for just the big dog.
And each one comes up with an intervention that's going to help the dogs that didn't get a bone. Maybe it's the social workers are doing cognitive behavioral therapy with the dogs, right, and so on. And it's true that the interventions that you do can change which dog ends up not getting a bone. But the reality is, if there's 100 dogs and there's 88 bones, 12 of them are going to be without a bone, and we can influence which 12, but if the structural opportunities to get bones aren't there, some of those dogs are going to be left without a bone. And what's happened in the recession is that we have, obviously that's an extreme view of where jobs come from, and there's any number of problems with that, which makes it a parable rather than an economic analysis. But as the economy becomes less forgiving, more marginal people are being squeezed out, and maybe musical chairs is a better analogy.
No, but I don't think the analogy works, Harold. I'm having a problem because you just gave it away by saying more marginal people. In other words, you just made reference to differences, interpersonal differences at the level of the individuals. That's not about the structure. So there's two things going on, because it's going to be the same people every time, right? I mean, every time the recession hits, the incidence of this malady of being rationed out is not going to just fall randomly. Musical chairs and music stops. If you're not near a chair, you're out. It's going to fall systematically. When the music stops, if you don't have what it takes, you're out. And if you don't have what it takes, you're out every time. So that's not.
Yeah, you're right. It's not.
But go back to the dog bone metaphor just to underscore the punchline, which is the punchline is the inequality that you see, A, is not responsive to your remediation, because the systemic inequality is a function of the structure, not of the characteristics of the individuals, and B, disparities at the individual level need not measure anything really important about individuals except their capacity to get themselves further up or back in the queue of competing for these scarce opportunities.
And I think one of the insights from that, and you'll never, by studying individuals and differences among them, you'll never really see the structure that's the real problem.
That's a deep. I believe that's a deep point.
And clearly, what's happening now, we have, whether you're talking about rural Kentucky or Detroit, we have places in America where, where the overall macroeconomy is in a state of, deep recession, whatever you want to call it. And one thing that was actually done very nicely in This American Life story was, I think she did a nice job of interviewing people and just hearing their human stories and how there really was, these people just have no role in the economy. When I put myself in the shoes of some of these older workers, after plant closings, they go on disability. What else can they do? This is really, and they have real disabilities, but at the same time, if they were, if the plant were still open, they would still be at the plant.
But didn't you say it was 240 billion and growing? That's not a small amount of money.
No, it's not. Although, of course, in the context of a huge economy, it's we're a nation of 300 plus million people, and a GDP that's up there at $13 trillion. So we have to put that in perspective.
Okay, well, 2% of GDP.
So I think that
that's not a small amount of money.
No, some of the cash transfer pieces. If you look at the cash transfer pieces, I think we're talking in the range of one. The real problem is that it's gone from SSDI. We're talking going from like 0.7 to 1.2% of GDP.
Okay.
So I mean,
and the other part is the healthcare, Medicare provision to.
In fact, one of the insights I think in this debate that people should have is we should just pay the medical bill. That should not be part of whatever we do with people's eligibility for disability. We need to make sure that we need to subsidize health care for low-income people with serious health problems in some way.
Now this is off the top of my head and it may make no sense whatsoever. But, I mean, this is back to what's our theory of disability? question. So one way of approaching this problem, lots of dimensions of efficacy that can become more or less impaired in different kinds of occupational job environments, which will have different consequences for people, but it's all gotten lumped into one thing. Maybe there's an alternative to that. So for example, why is the Medicare eligibility age just a fixed number? Why can't it be a number that depends upon your type? Your type is assessed by looking at the arc of your history, your work history, your health, your personal health, your maybe even your family genetics, I don't know. And some people are a little more at-risk type than other people are, to the extent that this can be effectively assessed. We can have people become eligible for Medicare because they need Medicare without at the age of 58 instead of at the age of 65, if that's what it is.
That's a very interesting
without
point. By
having
the way,
declared
one of
them
the
disabled in
problems.
some categorical way. Excuse me, just to finish. Yeah.
By the way, one of the interesting problems we have with our disabilities, we've raised the regular Social Security retirement age, and so some of these people who are now going on disability, it's because they're
they don't qualify for retirement full benefits.
They're waiting. Yeah, I mean, they're waiting for the official
Yeah.
Social Security retirement. And well, it's interesting what you say about the Medicare age. Assuming, of course, we can't have a Medicare age of 0 and just put everybody.
Well, that would be another approach, exactly. But I thought we decided that in the
that's probably not going to happen in the near term.
Healthcare Act.
Almost all of the gain in post-age 65 life expectancy has occurred in the top half of the income distribution. And as we think about ways to make Medicare a more financially disciplined program, one of the ideas that people have had is to suggest that if you're higher income, in some way or another, you should either pay a higher premium or wait a little longer to get Medicare because you have a higher expected lifespan. It's actually striking how little improvement there's been in lifespan among men in the bottom half of the distribution if you look after age 65. You know, all the stuff you hear about how we're all living longer, etc., that's basically people like us. It's not, it's not the bottom half of the income distribution, and some greater differentiation there in some fashion, I think might make some sense.
Okay, let me be provocative. This is blind again. Not that be provocative.
Okay.
I don't smoke, and they do. They should stop smoking.
Okay, they should stop smoking.
No, I mean, what's wrong with that position? I don't mean to say bar the door, they can't have anything, but I just mean to say, how moved should I be by learning, if it's true, and you're the expert, that longevity isn't expanding at the same rate at the bottom as at the top of the social class structure, if I know, as a matter of fact, that a healthy heart and lungs and cardiovascular system is more likely if you get regular exercise, if you don't smoke, and if you avoid eating, having too much cholesterol in your system, and that behavioral change is more frequently observed at the top than at the bottom of the social hierarchy. Maybe that accounts for a good deal of the difference in the class-based rate of growth of longevity, and maybe there isn't really any social issue or political or sort of fairness issue involved in that, and so forth. Again, I just mean to be provocative.
Well, I think there's a couple of things there. One is I think everyone, when they reach Medicare, right now is receiving, in an actuarial sense, far more than they contributed to the program. So if you're a high-income person, that seems more reasonable to me to say, is that really good policy?
Okay, given that we're going to make an adjustment for this generation's over benefit from Medicare should mostly take place at the high end, I can buy that.
But also I think that two other things. One is many of the adverse health behaviors that you describe are influenced by people's position in the social structure. And so, it's not by happenstance that lower income people are eating cheaper food at McDonald's rather than going on, going to Whole Foods and buying more nutritious food. There's a whole series of economic and social things going on that make it harder for someone on the far south side of Chicago to eat as healthy as someone who lives in Hyde Park. And we know that there's a number of stresses that that are involved in that. I think it's a little bit hard to separate individual behavior from context in a clean way. But I also think that there's a moral. The other thing is that if you smoke, the real incentive to stop smoking is you're not going to die young. And it's if we're worried that we're people of high income get to enjoy substantially longer longevity, we're going to get a lot of benefits from our healthy habits anyway. And do we really? It just seems to me that we're from a fairness point of view, I would say, yeah, that guy definitely should not be smoking. But
I think we're talking about this is an eternal question here about individual and social responsibility, and about how much weight do you want to put on differences between people who happen to be endowed with tastes or orientations or behavioral patterns that are more or less felicitous. So I mean, for example, suppose some people enjoy working and other people find it really very onerous. Some people take great pleasure in applying themselves, and other people find it very hard to get out of bed in the morning. And so the former is going to do well, the latter is going to do poorly. And when it comes time to divvy up who's going to pay taxes or how we're going to spread out benefits, how much should the former person be asked to give up to the latter person because of the happenstance of them having been endowed with an inclination to industry, and the latter person to sloth? I mean, what about criminal offending? Okay, so the person takes an act, he does something that's harmful to another individual, their property or their person. And now, because of the environment, more people are inclined to take those acts because it's an impoverished moral or social psychological environment. There's a lot of noise, parental abuse, no resources, bad role models, segregated society. But the person did this act. Now we have to respond to the act. And how much discounting are we going to do? Are we going to treat that person differently than a person from the upper end of society who had every advantage and who maybe did a similar act? How can that be justified? So on.
Well, by the way, there's a very general set of issues that you've raised, which I have I have a complete answer to, but it's written in the margin of my.
Oh, sure, right. Okay, but what's this more general question to my more general comment?
but I'll give a more specific. One thing about sort of some people are more diligent than others. I think one aspect that is very class-based, that is sort of striking to me, is that people like you and I have pretty fun jobs, and we also have jobs that are not physically demanding. And if when I listen to people who talk about the need to say raise the Social Security retirement age, these are not people who have a job where they pick up a trash can and they lug it the length of a driveway and then empty it into the back of a garbage truck. These are people who are sitting at a computer typing away and going to meetings and complaining about how boring they are, and talking on the phone to their friends at blogging heads. And
well, we can't adjust the retirement age for the onerousness of the job because the latter is too hard to measure and certify in any systematic way. Otherwise, your problem would be a second-order problem, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and I think we actually do, to some extent, we do try to adjust those retirement ages for jobs, and firefighters get to retire younger than other people, and so on. But I think that there's a class dimension to what we do in our jobs that I don't have a job where I have some really obnoxious boss looking over me and I just have to put up with it because I need the job. And so I don't have there's a lot of attributes of my job that make it a lot more fun to get out of bed and come and do it.
Right, but I still don't really understand the point. I mean, I'm not against helping people, okay, but I don't understand the point because everybody knows what these jobs are. And part of the compensation, quote unquote, of the job are the characteristics that are non-financial associated with how onerous it is, how much you have to bend your back, how much autonomy do you have, and so forth and so on. People are making career choices, investing in their human capital, taking their risk, and competing for these jobs out there in the marketplace. And some of us won the competition. I mean, for good reason. So, somebody makes more than me. They got people who make more money than me. I mean, I'm not bent out of shape by that fact. I assume they're getting paid more or less their productivity to whomever it is that's paying them. I don't have to bend my back. That was a choice I made. It was available to other people. Perhaps they needed to have certain qualities in order to compete effectively in this venue. I'm earning the benefits of my effective competition. Again, I don't owe anybody anything for that.
I don't know. Somehow that doesn't. There's an element that's lacking in that. When I think about that in its granularities, I'll give you an example. I was riding. Maybe I've given you this before. I was riding along on.
Not the Dan Ryan experience where your car breaks down and the guy comes and bails you out. Not that one.
Okay, I'm sorry. I won't get it. I'm in a rerun. But yeah, it just seems to me that here's this guy. He's earning 1/5 of what I earn. and he's riding every night along the highway, bailing people out. He actually earned less working that night than I earned writing a column about him driving around bailing.
That's ironic.
And here's a guy. He's doing every kind of virtuous characteristic that you would identify. This guy's basically doing it. He's raising a child. He's supporting his family, and he doesn't have a very lucrative skill, but he's doing something that's enormously socially valuable. Now, do I want to completely equalize my income and his income? No. There's reasons why we have income inequality, but there's also limits on that honor the fact that we're equally important people in some deeper way, and that what he's doing is, although it's not as well remunerated as what I do, is something that's important.
Can I just stop you for a minute here? I'm sorry. I gotta stop. Okay. This is going to be like quasi-libertarian.
Yeah, it was already quasi-libertarian.
We are not equally important people in any way that's relevant to what we're talking about, which is how much compensation people get and how hard their job is. We are equally important people in some intrinsic valuation of our humanity way. No, you don't.
I like the way you say that.
No,
like it's sort of. Well, there is the intrinsic.
Well, but that's not what we're talking about, because there is no policy question involved in weighing the worth of a person's soul, where I will posit that we are intrinsically equal. But there is a policy question involved in weighing how many hours a week does somebody work, how many pounds do they lift on average per day when they go to work, and how much money do they make. And I don't think we're equally important along that dimension. I think some people are more productive than other people are, and I think the people who are less productive don't have a claim on the people who are more productive based on some notion of being equally important.
Well, I guess I do think there's a claim. There are degrees of inequality that are either fair or desirable for incentive reasons that we have, to make an economy run. And we want to give. We want to pay people like Glenn Loury to go to graduate school and to do the work that you do rather than drive a cab. But we also, it is a fundamental policy challenge that the economy that results from that results in a pretty unequal distribution of important stuff, and that we want to soften the consequences of that material inequality and make sure that there are certain ways where our equal humanity really becomes a big policy problem, because if that truck driver can't afford some of the necessities of life that he needs, we want to make sure that he can get that. And you're in a position and I'm in a position to pay taxes to provide that. And some of that is health care, and some of that might be his ability to retire early if he hurts his back and he can't drive that truck anymore. And it seems to me that public policy needs that sort of quasi-libertarian frame that you're giving, really cuts short the depth of our obligation based on our equal worth as people.
Perhaps so.
Let's shift the conversation?
What I was thinking about is there are surgeons, and some surgeons are much more talented than other surgeons. And if we look at the allocation of the time of surgeons as a function of how talented they are and who gets the services of the most talented surgeons, we're going to find that that's not equally distributed in the population. Some people, like the guy who drove a truck out to help you out on the Dan Ryan Expressway on a dark night, are unlikely, if they were to need their kidney or their intestines or their heart or lung operated on, be treated by the most talented surgeon. And other people, like the people who run the university that I work for, or who run hedge funds, or who are partners in law firms downtown, or whatever it might be, are likely to be referred and then referred again, and perhaps are referred a third time until they can get some of the time of these most talented people. And I was thinking of that as an example where equal humanity claims might be pertinent. That is, your right to life, to be treated if there's heterogeneity, inequality in the effectiveness of the medical personnel, to have access to the most talented, to have your chance of longevity maximized. That's a kind of claim to equality there that I find to be extremely forceful. But monetary redistributions, I guess maybe I'm at the bottom. If you're saying, a person shouldn't have to go without health care, of course, this person shouldn't have to go without housing. Of course, there should be a safety net, of course. But, maybe around the margins of adjusting these programs, if you're saying they're going to be cost-borne, how do we distribute the cost among program beneficiaries? Let's try to hit the people who are already the best off. I wouldn't necessarily quibble with that either. So I don't know, maybe I'm backing off a little bit from my libertarian stance, but...
I think that, well, if you are, it's only good.
Okay, you were going to move on to something else, though. Our time is running short.
Well, I think, by the way, another area where structure and individual responsibility is very murky is in the pervasive inability of people to save for their retirements. And the median saver is basically nowhere close to what they really need to save if they want to maintain a standard of living in retirement that matches what they could support as a worker. And this is one of the most serious policy challenges that we have, and especially with the collapse of the defined benefit pension system, with changes in the economy, it's becoming increasingly...
People are radically undersaving.
People are radically undersaving, and there's a variety of efforts made to give people better advice, to nudge people into better behavior, and so on. And there's a question, how far do we go with these, and how realistic is it to expect that people can save appropriately for their retirement, both given their failure to make the right decisions. I mean, there's an amazing amount of stupidity that the average saver will engage in, and also just given the vicissitudes of work life in 21st century America, where people get sick, they lose their jobs, etc., and we've just seen stagnant wages, so it's harder for people to save. And it seems to me that's a really fascinating policy challenge that we're nowhere close to really addressing appropriately.
So, what are some of the proposals on the table, or how are people in the policy world thinking about? I mean, I've heard about Cass Sunstein's nudge and Thaler, Richard Thaler's, finding devices like changing the default option so that you have to actually take an affirmative step to avoid having the withholding from your check for your IRA, rather than having it that you have to take an affirmative step to have the thing included, things of that kind. Are there ideas beyond that? Because we're into a kind of paternalism, are we not? We're into a kind of maybe not big brother, but friendly uncle, nudging the consumer, decision maker, citizen along the path to more responsible or more effective behavior that they wouldn't otherwise be inclined to take. What are people doing in the area of savings that's promoting savings that's of that kind?
So, I think there's a lot that can be done that's very valuable in that area, by the way. I think that clearly we should be doing more nudging, and the default option should be close to the optimum option for most people, because we just know that many people don't even give it a second thought, and they will just do whatever the standard response is. Now, one of the challenges that we have, though, is that if you look at studies of individual experiments to sort of tweak the incentives that individuals face, some of these experiments are very promising, but then when you try to really do them on a large scale, for a variety of reasons, they're not really adequate. So one reason is, if you have an opt-in system for pensions, it turns out at some point employers say, well, if everybody's going to sign up for the 401k, I'm going to give less, because the amount that I give in my benefit kind of presupposes that a certain percentage of the workers are just not going to bother. And if all of a sudden 100% of the workers are bothering, then all of a sudden your Fortune 500 company says, well, I'm not going to be quite as generous anymore because it's costing me money. I wanted to get to the conscientious savers who I really want as my employees, and I'm willing to pay this, but for the but I start to hit a budget.
Now the employer has to match the worker's contribution, and so might not be as in favor of promoting savings as social analysts would be.
Yeah, and also the other thing, though, is that even if people behave optimally, it turns out that it's really hard for most people to just save enough. And in fact, one of the sad things, actually, this for me, it's I almost when my brother-in-law moved into our house, we had a really serious financial crisis personally, because all of a sudden we had all these new bills, and Veronica couldn't work anymore, because she had to take care of her brother, and I'm really proud of the fact that we dug ourselves out and we actually saved a quarter of our income for the past 9 years, which is which I'm really proud of. We drive an old car, we do all the things you're supposed to do. But I'm really, I'm going to bask in the applause at this moment. but we also were in a position to do that because I have a good job, and we used all these tax advantage savings vehicles, and all this kind of stuff that that you and I and our friends probably all do. And somebody at half the income can't really do that, in the way that that we can. So when I look at the debate over Social Security and whether we should go to the chained CPI, one of the things that troubles me about that is there's this fundamental intuition that we need to lower Social Security benefits to make the program, work financially. And one of my fears with that is if we do that and we don't improve the way people save, there'll be many people approaching retirement who know that they're not going to have enough money and who are therefore going to run around and do stupid things like, go to the local steakhouse and buy a rip-off variable annuity because they're just desperate to find something to solve an essentially unsolvable problem for them. And so I think probably
hold on a minute,
it's
though.
a little naive.
Let me just ask about the chain CPI because that's been in the news of late.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know anything about how cost of living adjustments are implemented for Social Security, but here's what I'd always kind of heard and thought about this, which was that the Congress, in its wisdom, elaborated provisions for making periodic adjustments to Social Security payments in order to keep up with the cost of living, but that the formula that was put in place to effect that policy decision wasn't really, quote, the right formula, close quote, in the sense that it didn't measure well or accurately or properly what the true cost of living was. And so over adjustments on the upside were being affected because of a mismatch between the desire to adjust for true cost of living increase and the out-of-date or inappropriately specified formula. And that what chain CPI is about is fixing that adjustment formula so that it does more accurately affect changes in the cost of living, which would have the implication, of course, of reducing benefits from what they otherwise would have been, not reducing them in an absolute way, but reducing the trend upward in those benefits, but that reduction would merely be the artifact of having correctly, instead of over-generously, measured the increases in the cost of living. Now, what did I say that was wrong in that last few sentences?
Well, there's a technical argument about whether, in fact, the chain CPI is better. Let's assume, and I think there's some reason to think that there's other measures that would be better. But let's assume that everything you said was correct. But the end result of doing this change would be to lower the replacement rate that Social Security provides to retirees. I think it then puts more burden on people's ability to save outside of Social Security, and people are so desperate for annuitized forms of wealth that I think that this would really cause a problem for a lot of people. We know that Social Security is the major source of income for most people.
But then wouldn't the right response be to adjust the inflation adjustment formula so that it accurately reflects cost of living, because that's going to be in place for a very long time and have perhaps large implications in the far out years. But then at the same time, the benefits are inadequate. Raise the benefits. So don't raise the benefits indirectly by overinflating for a price adjustment.
No, you know what? I think that's absolutely right what you just said. But my fear is that the political outcome will be this becomes the bargaining chip that we use to bring the program into balance. And if we do that, we will have a more technically correct program that does a worse job of doing what it's supposed to do. And if you look at trends over time in retirement savings and pensions and so on, Social Security has been the only thing that most people can really rely on, and so it is an anxiety. And but one of the ironies for me is, if you go to any of these rip-off seminars, the first thing they tell people is Social Security will not be there for you. That is absolutely step one.
Okay, so you're referring to an industry selling annuities to people, and an annuity is what? Give me your assets, and I'll promise to give you a regular stream of income as long as you live. The amount of assets you give me influences how much a monthly payment I'll send out to you. People want to be secure in their old age, so in effect they're taking the equity in their houses and they're handing it over to insurance or finance companies who are promising to send them a monthly check. But when you do the actuarial calculation, the rate of return that they're getting on their money is real low, like negative.
Yeah, if you looked at any of these products, first of all, it would be very hard to understand what the product was. I mean, but it's one of these things. It's like when you sit down at a poker game and you don't know who.
If you don't know, you do. It's you.
yeah.
So you wonder, how can these people be making money? I don't see where they're making money here. Well, they must know something that you don't know.
And and it seems to me the entire financial services industry is fairly predatory on people who are desperately trying to save, who are pretty unsophisticated about it.
What happened to competition? How come, if that's the case, other service providers in the financial industry don't enter and take away the markets from these shysters and still make a profit, if what you say is true?
I think
at the University of Chicago, that's what they say around there about the stuff that's supposed to happen. At least that's what I remember George Stigler
they
and
do say that.
Saying. Gary Becker.
They do say that. They also said that the financial crisis wasn't going to happen. Those other things. Well, I think that we have a series of market failures that we have not dealt with properly through regulation, and we've created a market for financial products that is, where people have serious conflicts of interest that are pervasive. And we mentioned we both admire Sendel, a great economist.
Sendel Mullainathan at Harvard, a behavioral economist who writes about these issues.
And their research team, sent out auditors to see how the kinds of advice that financial professionals would give to actors who basically posed as couples who were trying to plan for their retirement. And the majority of when people came in with a perfectly appropriate retirement portfolio that had low fees and that was the right mix of risk and so on, the majority of the advisors, told them that they should get rid of that and pick up something that was less appropriate but more lucrative to the financial
Okay, so they did a
profession.
testing exercise, sending people out to financial advisors. The test was jiggered so that the people went in with an incumbent portfolio already in place that was optimally adapted for him. And they found systematically that the investment advisors were advising them away from what was known to be optimal in the direction of things that increased their profits. Okay, well, I can't say I'm surprised to hear that, but it's worth knowing.
And so you have people who are not sophisticated investors, and the very people that they turn to for help are often the people giving them the worst advice. My theory, by the way, is that the best advice is available for free on a 3x5 index card at the library. So almost by definition, most of the advice that people pay for, they are not, is not going to be the right advice. So we really, I think at some level, I don't know if this makes me more or less paternalist, but I'm fundamentally suspicious that the sort of nudging strategies beyond a certain point are really going to get us there. And we really have to think about, more systemic solutions like raising the Social Security benefit or doing other things like that, where we remove the burden from individuals to make decisions that we know they're going to make badly. Whether it's because people are not good at planning for the future, or whether it's because people don't understand financial products. We've created just a real mess in our retirement savings. And having spent a long time personally trying to sort of get my own house in order, I see all the ways that it's difficult and all the ways that I just don't think that most people are in a position financially or educationally.
Well, now let me ask you this. There are certain flagship providers out there of these financial services like Fidelity or Vanguard or TIAA, Kraft. These are some that come to mind. Would the typical consumer be safe walking into the offices of one of these huge corporate giants who have hundreds of thousands of clients and turning over their $1.5 million lifetime nest egg at the age of 63 to be managed by one of these firms? What do you think?
I think that by the way, I should tell you that before I answer this question, I need to send you my prospectus, and do not invest before reading it carefully. And all investment brings risk.
All right, Harold. And your fee is going to be barely noticeable given the above market returns that I'm going to be realizing if I invest with you.
Just 2 and 20. I wouldn't worry about it. Don't even bother. You don't even really need to read about that. I would say that you're certainly safe. I mean, I think these Vanguard target age funds, have been, they've done quite well for me. I think if you're doing something simple, they're certainly not going to steal your money. But I think that they have a big incentive to charge you higher fees than you really need to be paying, and they encourage people to do things. I don't think this is true of Vanguard and Fidelity, but I think it's true of if you walked into one of the major investment houses, that they would have a big incentive to encourage you to buy and sell individual securities, to get involved in options, to do all sorts of things that for the average person, make no sense. and are expensive, and expose people to risks that they don't understand. And it is in the way that the opposition to Dodd-Frank, in some of the ways that Democrats tried to I shouldn't say Democrats, because I think some of the Democrats were on board with this, some not, but there was an effort made to impose a legal fiduciary responsibility on brokers, on financial advisors in different categories that was just deeply, deeply resisted by the industry. And that kind of tells you, many in the industry want a legal standard that says that the advice I give to Glenn Loury is appropriate, but they don't want a standard that says I'm giving the best advice to Glenn Loury. I'm giving the advice that
so they want
wiggle
room to exercise their discretion on behalf of their own interests by giving advice that might be credible at some level, but not the best advice if it favors them to do so.
Absolutely. And so if you want me to manage your portfolio, I'll be happy to do it for you. And I'm sure that I will pick out an appropriate mix of...
All right, I'll bear that in mind, Harold. Thanks for talking with us here at the Glenn Show. Very informative. We covered a lot of ground. We'll see you again soon. Take care.
Great. See you soon.